September the 5th this year marked the 25th anniversary of the death of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. She became well known around the world for her works of charity towards the sick, the poor, the neglected and marginalized people in over 133 countries around the world. She founded the Missionaries of Charity with over 4,500 nuns who joined her in her mission to give loving care and hope to those who were left to fend for themselves on the streets and at the gates of despair, like Lazarus in our gospel today. This small Albanian nun would do things that would have the world take notice, to see the invisible and to break through the indifference of the world by making a difference in the lives of the world's poor and marginalized. When a reporter asked her how she was able to do the work she did tirelessly each day, she replied, "I never look at the masses." And what she meant by the masses were the many peoples around the world, not the celebration of the Mass that she held quite dear. But she said, "I never look at the masses as my responsibility. I look at the individual. I can only love one person at a time, just one. So," she said, "you begin. I picked up one person, and maybe if I didn't pick up that person, I wouldn't have picked up 42,000. The same thing goes for you. The same thing in your church and in your community. You just begin with one." It was written that when Mother Teresa was speaking to anyone, it was like everything around her stopped, and her focus was entirely set on the person, and that person she was speaking with, without any distraction. Now, for many of the younger people that are here today, you may not know too much about the woman of Mother Teresa, but with our modern day technology, we can look up her story on the internet and read her life story. And it is one of inspiration and love and is well worth anybody reading or rereading. Her entire being was always geared to love, of ensuring that all in need of care were given first priority. I remember on one occasion, I read a story about a reporter from ABC News who had been given the assignment to follow Mother Teresa around on a sort of a day in the life of. And as they walked through the streets of Calcutta, they came across a man who had been dumped on the street, suffering from what is known now as Hansen's disease, but more commonly known in the past as leprosy. Well, Mother knelt down next to him to comfort him. The reporter was shocked. He looked at her and said, "Mother, I wouldn't do that for $1 million. She said, "Neither would I." What she did was done from the heart, making a difference to combat the sin of indifference. So we here in this community are far from the streets of Calcutta for sure, but we are not immune from poverty and all its afflictions. We may know people in our own lives who are struggling and are metaphorically lying at the gate of indifference and invisibility in our own community. They may be people, as I said, that we know, or they could be just anonymous faces that we see on the street. And the readings today certainly focus on the indifference that takes place even in our modern day. The prophet Amos, although not one of the most well-known of the prophets, certainly speaks of the need to be an advocate for the impoverished and that justice must be done. And in fact, it is what God expects from us, that we who are more fortunate than others must demonstrate charitable acts of kindness to those we see in need. And the gospel parable today continues with that theme in and it is one that tells us that we all have a responsibility to offer justice and charity, and that God indeed wants us to share the gifts we have been bestowed with and to share what we can with others. The parable of Lazarus and the rich man describes the indifference that can be one of the greatest forms of blindness and deafness to the cries of those they ignore. So Lazarus the man was almost like a bump on the road he was stepped over and invisible. When I read this, I thought to myself about what I actually experienced in London several years ago. I was looking forward to that trip, and when I came off the London Underground and came up into this wide open space, people everywhere. Downtown London is so crowded that you had to pay a toll if you wanted to drive your car into the downtown area. So that kind of gives you an idea of how many people are there. And as I walked on the sidewalk, taking in the sights, I noticed that people were diverging left and right of something, and some people were just jumping over something. I thought it was maybe a big hole or something in the sidewalk. And as I drew nearer, I realized it was a person who had fallen on the sidewalk and was unconscious. Well, being a good Canadian, you figure, well, I've got to do something. I didn't have a cell phone with me because it wouldn't work in London anyway, and I didn't even know who to call if I did have one. Apparently there, instead of 911, you have 999. But I was amazed, standing there wondering what to do, when the people on that sidewalk, that they were walking around this person laying on a sidewalk. They were actually stepping over this person, and nobody stopped. So I thought, what have we come to when this happens? Well, somebody must have taken their cell phone out while they were walking and called the 999, and they came, and I watched as they picked this man up off the street, put him in an ambulance, and drove off. What happened to him, I don't know. What his fate was, I don't know. But it sure told me that there was a problem in this world when you could leave somebody lying on a sidewalk in one of the most crowded streets in Europe and just leave him there. See, the indignity of one person for another based on their economics and that judgment alone dehumanizes their humanity to the lowest possible degradation. Now, if only the rich man in the parable today understood what God wanted him to do was to share the gifts that he had been blessed with. It was never meant to be coveted for his own purposes, but should have been generously shared for God's purposes. Ponder this. Once the demands of necessity and priority are met, everything else belongs to the poor. It is truly about the common good. Now, our modern world teaches us a practical atheism of sorts, of consumerism. And we find in the world today the replacement of God with things. So, how can we make a difference against indifference? Well, there are many things we can do to get to a place where we can make a real difference against the indifference. And we certainly may not be rich like the man in the parable and live extravagant lives, but we all have something to offer to those who are poor and marginalized around us in our own community. You see, we are a parish community, and within this parish community, that we are commissioned by our faith, by the teachings of Jesus Christ, to care for each other. It was right here, inside these four walls at St. John Vianney, that a place called Beacon House got its humble roots. A group of parishioners realized that there was a need, and it was going to take deeds, not just words, to make this happen. From this very simple beginning, after 37 years, it has grown to help with people's needs in the thousands. The thousands have used our facility at Beacon House each year. And the saddest part of that is it afflicts mostly elderly people, and unfortunately as well, that 30% of those who use the facility are children. Now, the church is more than just an organization. It is a living organism, alive as the body of Christ, and he wants us to love and look after our neighbors. We are the church founded by Christ, his church that continues to feed, to clothe, to educate, and look after the sick more than any other type of organization in the entire world. But we must always understand, too, that at every Mass, when we pass the sign of peace, we are saying to each other, I am with you. I have your back. And we must hear the voice of Jesus and answer the call to serve. As Mother Teresa said, you need to begin with one. So today, I'm asking you to continue to share your gifts and talents. And if you need to see charity in action, come and see. Come to Beacon House. There is a huge outreach there to assist our neighbors. And the need is great, and often the workers are few. But we cannot sit idly by like the rich man and do nothing. We must hear the voice of Jesus and answer the call to serve. And again, the words of Mother Teresa, you need to begin with one.